Good evening and welcome to a very special edition of Scotland at 7 here on Broadcasting Scotland. My name's Kenny McBride. We start tonight with just the headlines and then we're going to have a wee discussion about Aberdeen and the oil industry and how that looks going into the future. So as I say, we start with the headlines, but before we do, I just want to make a wee apology. On Tuesday night, I made a wee mistake. There was a typo on the script that we have here for the figures on our coronavirus update. And like Ron Burgundy, I just read what was there without twigging, which meant I announced a figure for deaths in Scotland that was almost 10 times the actual figure. So I do apologise for anyone that was distressed by that. We will double check again in future to make sure that doesn't happen. But we do start, as always, with our coronavirus statistics update. And as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there have been a total of 46,089 coronavirus tests concluded. Of these, 36,392 were confirmed negative and 9,697 were positive. 141 patients were in intensive care last night, with 136 of those having tested positive for the virus. There were a total of 1,710 people in hospital with either confirmed or suspected COVID-19. That marks an increase of 288 confirmed cases since yesterday, but a slight decline in the numbers in hospital and in intensive care. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by the COVID-19 infection has sadly risen to 1,184. That number only includes those who have died in hospital having already received a positive test for the virus. The latest UK daily figures available show 19,506 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 444,222 people have been tested, of which 300,758 were negative and 143,464 were confirmed positive. A national media campaign is being launched to encourage people to seek medical help for urgent health issues which are not related to the coronavirus. Figures indicate that patients are delaying seeking their GP during the pandemic, and there has been a drop in urgent suspected cancer referrals and a reduction in families bringing children for immunisation. Reasons may include wishing to reduce the strain on the NHS or concerns over becoming infected with COVID-19, as well as the misconception that doctors do not want to see patients. The NHS is Open campaign, launching today, will urge people to contact their GP or local hospital if they have any urgent health worries. Doctors and health experts have urged people not to drink or inject disinfectant after US President Donald Trump suggested scientists should investigate inserting the cleaning agent into the body as a way to cure COVID-19. Trump said at his daily media briefing yesterday that scientists should explore whether inserting light or disinfectant into the bodies of people infected with the new coronavirus might help them clear the disease. The White House said today that Trump had been taken out of context and had urged people to seek coronavirus treatment only after conferring with their doctors. As the hashtag #Don'tDrinkBleach trended on Twitter, First Minister Nicola Sturgeon echoed the advice of rational people everywhere. As she said, it's clearly not the case that ingesting disinfectant in any way, shape or form is a good idea. It is a very, very bad idea and extremely dangerous. Reckitt Benckiser, makers of disinfectant brands Dettol and Lysol, also issued a statement warning people not to ingest or inject its products under any circumstances. New legislation to give greater protection to victims of hate crime has been introduced to the Scottish Parliament. The Hate Crime Bill seeks to modernise, consolidate and extend existing hate crime law, ensuring it is a fit for the 21st century. Alongside the legislation being introduced, a working group will take forward work on a standalone offence of misogynistic harassment. The draft legislation updates the list of characteristics protected under hate crime legislation and proposes the addition of age to this list, where there is a statutory aggravation for offences motivated by prejudice. If passed by Parliament, the bill will also provide for new stirring up of hatred offences that would apply to all characteristics listed in the bill: age, disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, transgender identity, and variations in sex characteristics. Currently, those offences only apply to stirring up racial hatred. People who have suffered childhood abuse are being reminded that support services are still available during the response to the coronavirus. Health Secretary Jeane Freeman urged survivors to continue seeking help from organisations which are still open and working through the pandemic. This comes as the first round of funding has been confirmed from the Scottish Government's £10 million Survivors of Childhood Abuse support. Global leaders joined the World Health Organization today to launch an initiative to accelerate work on drugs, tests and vaccines against COVID-19 and to share them around the world. The world needs these tools and needs them fast, WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said as the virtual meeting began. We are facing a common threat which we can only defeat with a common approach. The WHO said late yesterday it would announce a landmark collaboration today to speed up development of safe, effective drugs, tests and vaccines to prevent, diagnose and treat COVID-19, the lung disease caused by the novel coronavirus. A spokesman for the US mission in Geneva said before the meeting that the United States would not be involved. And the SNP's Shadow Chancellor Alison Thewliss MP has said the UK government must go further and faster on providing financial support for businesses, after the Chancellor Rishi Sunak signalled a U-turn on providing 100% guarantees on loans up to £25,000 for small businesses. Thewliss, who has led calls for the 100% guarantee, said the change of direction was welcome, but would not in itself go far enough to fix the fundamental flaws in the UK government's scheme. The SNP Shadow Chancellor said that only a tiny fraction of businesses had received the promised support, underlining the need for the UK government to offer grants instead of just loans. She also said that lending criteria should be relaxed and the whole process should be sped up so that businesses can get quick access to the cash they urgently need. And those are our headlines for today. But now we are going to be joined by two guests, one from Aberdeen and one from Aberdeenshire. So first, I think we've got Stephen Flynn MP, the MP for Aberdeen South. And we've also got Councillor Neil Bailey, who represents Inverurie on Aberdeenshire Council. And I hope we have both of them available now. Can either of you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, both of you can. That's marvellous. So, welcome to the show, gentlemen. Thank you for joining us tonight. And as I said at the top of the show, we're going to be talking a wee bit about the oil industry and the future of that industry and the future of Aberdeen more generally. We've seen, obviously, this week a significant crash in the oil price, more so in the West Texas Intermediate price, which is the price that tends to affect American oil. The Brent crude price has maintained a little bit higher level, so Scotland has come off slightly better out of this crisis, but it's still not a good situation. But before we go to that, Stephen, if I could come to you first, how has the coronavirus been in Aberdeen? We've heard a lot of news about Glasgow in particular, that old West Coast bias in the media. So how are things in Aberdeen just now?
A little bit like everywhere at the moment, I think, notwithstanding your earlier comments, I think everyone's doing really well in terms of adhering to the guidance that the government have issued. You know, I've obviously out and about myself on my daily exercise, and you know, the streets are quiet, which is a good thing. It's the way you want it to be. And when I have had to nip off to the shops, everyone seems to be behaving themselves really well in terms of social distancing. And obviously, it's a worrying time for everyone. You know, you're concerned about your own health, you're concerned about your family's health, your friends' health. And I think everyone's taken that to heart and is acting the way that they should in order to ensure that the NHS is kept safe, which is, at this moment in time, the most important thing, because it's the best way to try and save lives.
Yeah, I actually went to university in Aberdeen. I was quite heavily involved in the student show and the torture parade. And of course, this is the first time in almost 100 years that they won't be happening. This is just about the week when they would normally be happening. How big a loss is that to the city?
I think everything at this moment in time is obviously up in the air. The numerous parades that we are fortunate enough to have in Aberdeen, be that Celebrate Aberdeen or indeed to the torture parade. I think actually the torture parade missed a year in the not too distant past due to some disagreements with the local authority, if I remember correctly. But notwithstanding that, I think it's a difficult time for everyone. This is the months where we'll be looking ahead to what's to come over the course of the summer, and we know that things are going to be completely different. But hopefully together, if we all keep our social distancing and do as the government says, then these things will come back in the not too distant future. Certainly, if we do as we're told. So.
Yeah, and Neil, how are things out in the Shire? It's obviously social distancing. Your people are just a wee bit more spaced out the more you are in the country anyway. How are things in Inverurie just now?
Inverurie's doing very well at the moment. I mean, there's a lot of good feeling within the people in the town. They are obviously taking a part in social distancing and being wary for watching out for each other. And I think that's what's the really good thing here. That's maybe a positive coming from it, is that people are spending a little bit more time, a little bit more compassion towards their friends, their neighbours, people, other people, phoning them, keeping in touch with them, asking if they need anything and trying to help where they can, while maintaining the social distancing, obviously. So it's been very, very good here.
Yeah. I mean, one thing I always noticed in Aberdeen, that there was always a very strong sense of community. Aberdeen itself always felt like the world's biggest village to me, where you couldn't go anywhere and without bumping into somebody you knew. Everybody seemed to know everybody, and I think that's even more the case once you get out into the country a wee bit. So, as I said, we want to talk about the oil industry. It's one of the key industries in Aberdeen, obviously. It's one of the things that Aberdeen is known for. And this week we saw the oil price decline down below $20 a barrel. It has had a wee slight recovery, but it's still not good. So I guess the first question is, I'll come to you on this first, Stephen. What impact is being felt in Aberdeen right now as a result of this decline in demand and obviously the decline in the price of oil?
Yeah, I think the first point to start with is that this isn't necessarily new. Since the start of the year, since January, the oil price has been declining steadily. Obviously, over the course of the last couple of weeks, that's become more into focus due to the coronavirus outbreak. But we had the disagreements that were happening at OPEC level, and then of course we've had the perfect storm with coronavirus come on top of that. And at this moment in time, I think there's a real sense of concern in and around Aberdeen about what's to come. You pick up a paper, you look online, and you see that companies are seeking to cut back on the number of staff that they have. The expectation for drilling in the future has reduced, and that creates a real sense of concern because we're not too far away from the last oil price crash. It's something that's happened before in Aberdeen in the past as well. And when it does happen, it has a huge impact upon almost everyone in the city because even though a lot of folk are employed directly in the industry, the supply chain is enormous. And you don't have to go far in the city to find someone who knows someone who works or is indirectly working for the oil and gas sector. So there's a lot of concerned people at this moment in time, rightly so. And I can understand why they are, because ultimately this is intrinsic to the future of so many people's lives and to the city itself and the wider region. Our economic prosperity is on the line at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I mean, this is not the first time, as you say, that we've seen an oil price crash. There was a substantial fall in the price in 2014 as well, which of course during the independence referendum campaign became quite a big talking point. What difference have you seen as a result of kind of government interventions since that crisis? And is there any new government interventions happening just now?
Well, of course, before we get into the immediate term, over the course of the last few years, long before I was a member of Parliament, the UK government was promising an oil and gas sector deal, one that would be transformative. And indeed, it was in the most recent Conservative manifesto. We had a debate in Parliament just a couple of months ago on this very subject, and at that time, before, of course, the coronavirus outbreak, I asked the Minister, where are we in relation to this? When will it happen? And we were told over the course of the Parliament. Now, it's my understanding that might be coming a little bit quicker down the line. But to date, there has still been absolutely no sector-specific announcement from the UK government in terms of support for the oil and gas sector. And that is a huge concern, not just in the immediate term, but in the long term as well. We've been pushing, I was elected on a manifesto for a just transition fund to be put in place so that we could look to the future to ensure that there was that sustainable transition to take place, because oil and gas is not going to be here forever. But what we didn't expect, what nobody expected, was the pace and the urgency for a just transition fund to be put in place, or a sector deal, as the UK government wanted to call it. But it needs to happen now. I've been raising this in Parliament for weeks now, since the start of March. I've written to the Chancellor on a number of occasions. I raised it in the House of Commons. Fortunate enough to be in an economy finance bill debate on Monday afternoon, when I'll be raising this very issue again, because the silence from the UK government can't continue. As I said, the economic prosperity of Aberdeen and the wider region is intrinsically linked to the oil and gas sector, so we need action, and we need action now.
Yeah, and Neil, obviously, Inverurie itself is not, at the very heart of the industry, but as Stephen said, it does affect the whole region. There's supply chains. There's people, I'm sure, living in Inverurie who work in the sector, and of course, just people having money to spend affects all businesses in the region. How is this crisis affecting people in Inverurie just now?
I think it is affecting them quite a lot, that they're not able to go out and do about their normal day business, for one thing, and it raises a lot of questions, particularly on the benefits that some maybe want to receive, certainly under questions under furlough, certainly under questions, but relating towards oil and gas in specific, there is that differences to oil workers. I mean, was made redundant in 2016, 2016, when there was a crash then, and there was a lot of workers that were left the industry at that point, whereas the industry was learning to cut its cloth and come down in size with all it was doing. I was particularly involved with the exploration side, of which is certainly a lot less now than there used to be, and that's had a very big impact upon the workforce. As far as COVID is concerned, COVID-19 is concerned, the industry, for what I'm hearing from my colleagues that still work in the industry, that's had an impact. But the industry is quite robust in how it works to around that. It has to get its employees, before they leave home, filling out the check forms to how their health is, getting checked at the heliport, and then also when they're offshore, being checked and asked how they feel when they're offshore as well. There's maybe even potentially a move between operators and I think contractors as well to maybe go to a 4-4 rotation over this period of time, because it's been deemed as being safe, but also keeping the people the volatility and keep them in jobs offshore in particular. So there is aspects where the industry always seems to move towards the aspects of health and safety in particular, and everyone else's safety that's related to the industry, to try and find a solution. And I think it's that kind of a response in Aberdeenshire that can be put on within the industry, that tries to help within the industry. The hard part for the Aberdeenshire, however, onshore, is for the families of those that work offshore, and how they're impacted by COVID-19, or with the impact of the downturn in the price of oil eventually, and how that affects people related to the industry and the people that support the industry in particular. So that could be anything from your shops, your retail, schools, education, health, how everybody that relates and supports people that work within the industry itself, and how that impacts upon them. Of course, it has a big impact as it goes further along the line into our communities as well.
Yeah, of course. I mean, we heard yesterday that the Scottish economy is expected to contract by 33% just as a result of lockdown measures. And clearly, if the oil price drops, the oil industry starts to shed jobs, then clearly that's going to have an even bigger, it's going to multiply the impact on Aberdeen and the wider region. You mentioned that you were involved in the exploration side of things. Have you heard anything about where exploration is just now? Because I was reading some research today showing that a lot of kind of exploratory drilling was stopped, and a lot of future projects were now being scaled back because of this fall in the oil price. Have you heard anything about that in the Aberdeen region, in the North Sea fields?
From what I know, that there's a lot of rigs that would have been out there working, or looking to fulfil contracts right now, or looking to get the better weather to try and work in the North Sea, are actually quite stacked right now because of, one, the price, and two, the COVID-19 situation and how that's going to impact for the length of time on the industry. So we know that there's a lot of more rigs that are in the Murray Firth, stacked at the moment, semis and the jack-up rigs. And of course that gives that little bit of uncertainty towards the industry for the immediate future. But if I can go back to what you were saying earlier about the price of oil, yes, I mean, I think the Brent crude this afternoon was somewhere at about $21 a barrel. And the American price for oil had, as you said, dropped to a negative number earlier in the week. It's now up about $19 a barrel. So, and also that OPEC have put implications in place to reduce production by the 1st of May. The plans in place for that by so many millions barrels per day. So with that impacting as well, the industry can be actually quite robust in ways globally to try and look at the price of oil, try and look at the stock that it's already got, and wondering how it's going to shift it. So there's a level of playing here to try and reduce the production, and in other words, to get rid of the stock they already have, and hopefully then that would have a quite an increased and immediate effect to try and increase the price on oil, so that eventually, when that stock is gone, when people are back consuming again, when this crisis is over, then hopefully then the industry itself can look at that, get itself looking forward. Hopefully that can be done in conjunction with what's happening in the North Sea. But it's something that certainly is a concern for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And now, Stephen, to come back to you again, the lockdown obviously is taking a real toll on the economy, as we said. What particular support do you think is needed for Aberdeen, and not necessarily just for businesses, but for people as well? What do you think both the UK and the Scottish governments could do more of to help Aberdeen get through this?
Yeah, and that's ultimately the most important thing at this moment in time is how we get through this. And, we've been quite clear, particularly in terms, I think I mentioned it earlier, in relation to a Just Transition Fund. Just on a manifesto commitment that the UK government needs to put in place £1 billion worth of resource to allow the city and region to make a sustainable transition. Now, that's something which should very much still be on the table. And it's something that should probably be getting looked at being delivered sooner rather than later, given the situation that we're in. We can't allow the government just to sit silent and not do anything. They need to put some money into the city and the region to ensure that sustainable transition can take place. Now, that's something that needs to happen, as I said earlier, it needs to happen now. We can't afford to wait. And on top of that, I think what needs to happen is the government needs to have a more in-depth look at how its current employment support schemes are working in terms of job retention and the like. The much lauded furlough scheme, which is in place at this moment in time, hasn't stopped a number of oil and gas companies who are huge employers in the northeast of Scotland from looking to shed some of their workforce. And there's been a lot of questions as to why they might want to do that. And a lot of that's based upon the fact that at this moment in time, the furlough scheme is only for a short period. The oil and gas industry is very cognizant of the fact that this is likely to be an issue which rumbles on for a considerable period of time. As Neil said, the industry is very robust, but ultimately in terms of exploration and the like, there has been that huge impact and retraction in what the industry would be seeking to otherwise do. So the government needs to ensure that the furlough scheme that it has in place meets the needs of the oil and gas sector and seek to extend that. And that's something that I'll be following up on that. And I know that those within the industry are also making similar asks. So there is things that the UK government can do immediately, and we will continue to call for them to do that. But ultimately, what they really need to do is get out there and talk to the sector itself and see what additional support it is that they need. They're the experts. They're the ones who've been through this before. They're the ones who will get us through this because, as Neil said, and rightly so, the industry is robust. It has been through these things before and it knows how to recover. But we do know ultimately that oil and gas will not be here in 40, 50, 60, 70 years. So we need to plan for that future anyway. And if that needs to be sped up a little bit, then the UK government should be doing it.
And are you getting any sense from your I was going to say colleagues, but they're not exactly colleagues, the people on the opposite benches at Westminster, are you getting any sense from them that is something that they've got on their minds?
Absolutely not. I've been a bit astonished actually by some of the remarks that I've read from the likes of David Duckett and Alexander Burnett in relation to this issue. They seem to think that there isn't a problem here when this is frankly the biggest issue facing the northeast of Scotland, out with the coronavirus epidemic, because it ultimately impacts upon whether we're going to have a successful economy into the future, which impacts upon every single person here. So yeah, I think they really need to get their heads out of the sand in relation to this. They need to realise that the industry needs support, and ultimately they need to use whatever influence they have within the Conservative Party. I'm not quite sure how influential they are, but they need to use whatever influence they do have to try and get the Chancellor to see some sense and to put some measures in place to support the city and the region before it's too late. And the fear is that if this does not happen, if there is not support, it's where it puts us. And that's where it comes back to that sense of worry, because everyone ultimately in the northeast of Scotland is linked in some way or another, as Neil's rightly said, to the industry and the industry being prosperous.
Mm-hmm. And Neil, much the same question to you. What would you be looking for from, again, both the Scottish Government and the Westminster Government? What would you be looking for to help the Aberdeenshire region?
I think, as Stephen has said, it's definitely help that is needed here, and definitely that question he's asking out. And I'm glad that Stephen's saying and going to Westminster and asking for that help, because it is needed. I think one of the interesting points that there was in the excellent AIM movie for the City in Transition was a comment from Maggie Chapman, who said that even discussing before COVID, she was talking about Brexit within the film and how that may affect agriculture, food, research and technology in our area. But when you take those same factors and those same points and you transfer it to COVID, of course it has an impact. I think one of the very interesting things that we heard in 2014 was from the unionists was that oil was a volatile commodity. Well, it might be a volatile commodity, but it's a volatile commodity that is being tweaked and changed in different ways under COVID-19, as I was mentioning earlier. The price of oil can go up, come down, and it can be tweaked certainly from powers within OPEC and so on, and globally and from countries around the world. That doesn't mean to say that we can't control the oil in the future. In fact, one of our best assets we've got here in Scotland, and I've long said this and I will continue to say it, is the workforce itself. From what the oil and gas industry and the training that's second to none and has went around the world to train other countries in the sector, that is an asset that we should keep a hold on, because that's the asset, as Stephen says quite rightly, is the asset that we need for the transition to the renewable sector and to technology in the future. There's already some papers that go about new technologies and new industries that could potentially be on the horizon, and hopefully with those being developed and discussed and talked about in a sensible approach. That's something that unionists on the opposite benches that Stephen sits against, they are definitely not saying it and talking about any way forward other than what they want to say for the trying to protect the self-interest of the union. But there is a better way. There is a way under independence, and there's certainly a way that through using the utilities and the people in the northeast and the skills that they've got, that we can certainly look for a way forward and over this.
Mm-hmm. Well, it turns out that both of you are mind readers about the next couple of questions I wanted to ask, because I did want to look at the future of the oil industry itself. I mean, you mentioned Maggie Chapman. The Greens obviously have been telling us for many years, and it's now pretty widely accepted by most scientists, most politicians, that we can't afford to burn all the oil that we have in the ground, that some of it, probably almost all of it maybe, needs to stay there. And I wondered, how widely accepted is that idea in a city and a region where it is such an important industry? Neil, coming to you first on that, please.
I think it's quite an important point, actually, because as a lot of people in the city know, there's technology out there that we've never really had to fully utilise. Myself, I've got a background in well testing and underbalance drilling and running service tools. And with well testing, I've been on wells where we've tested a well and then shut the well down, knowing fine well that we'll never go back there because there might be a high H2S count. The H2S count might make it unprofitable to develop that well. But also with that discovery and that exploration has also increased company prices for the oil companies. So in a way, the industry has been utilising its way to try and make money indirectly from oil. But the aspect of knowing what technology is there, we've got small fields, we've got some very large fields that has been found in recent few years, even with the downturn of the price in oil and so on. Mariner springs to mind. That we have got a large asset out there that can still be utilised. I think the trouble being is that with the UK government from way back to even as far as the 70s and 80s, it was open the tap as much with the production side. And then whereas Norway's approach was to take your time in extracting the oil, make it unload the asset last longer, safer, and using it to its best ability. Hence why they've got such a large Norwegian oil fund there. I think that's something that, as Stephen was pointing out earlier, is something that we still have to do. We still have to look at towards getting an energy fund, an oil fund, if it may be, for what we still have to remain that's in the ground.
And Stephen, the same question to you, really. Do you get the feeling, again, at Westminster, but amongst your colleagues, the people that you talk to in Aberdeen as well, do you get the feeling that people do understand that there does need to be a transition away from oil as a major supplier of energy?
I think the one thing that everyone knows about folk in Aberdeen is they're a canny bunch, and that's true of this as well as it is of many other things. There is an acceptance, and it's an obvious acceptance that oil and gas isn't going to be here for forever, and that there needs to be a renewable future put in place. And what I want to see is I want Aberdeen to be at the forefront of that, and that's something that I'll champion. Neil mentioned the workforce earlier. If there's a more skilled workforce than the one in Aberdeen anywhere in the world, I would be surprised. And these are the folk, these are the people who have the skills and the expertise that will allow Aberdeen to hopefully become that renewables hub in the future. But I think we need to be clear that oil and gas is here at this moment in time, and it will be for the immediate foreseeable future, because we can't simply afford to turn off the taps. Our daily lives would change insurmountably if that happened, and the reality is that there is not, at this moment in time, other measures in place to allow daily life to continue. Now, some folks would say that that's a good thing, and to a certain degree it probably is in relation to some aspects of the way that we do things, but in others there is no substitute in place at this moment in time. But in terms of when we look at the oil and gas sector as well, it's also vital for our own energy security as a nation, and that's something that we have to be incredibly mindful of. I've already mentioned on a couple of occasions the desire that I have and my colleagues have for a just transition fund. But one thing I've not touched upon is the potential opportunity posed by carbon capture and storage. Carbon capture and storage up in Peterhead is something that should have been in place a long time ago, but the UK government pulled the funding. They've now set in motion in their most recent budget a new wave of carbon capture and storage investment, and there's a number of sites that are competing against each other, including in Teesside, and it's about knowing when that investment is actually going to land, because that has the potential to be a bit of a game changer for Peterhead and the surrounding region as well, and it also ensures that the oil and gas sector becomes a little bit cleaner than it perhaps otherwise would be, but that investment from the UK government isn't clear at this moment in time. The time frame around it isn't necessarily clear either. So there's a number of factors at play here. Everyone, myself included, just to go back to your initial question, accepts the fact that oil and gas will not be here in the long run. Whilst it is here, I think we need to maximise it to the best of our ability whilst planning for the future, and that planning for the future is perhaps upon us a little bit sooner than we'd anticipated due to the conditions that the industry finds itself in. But ultimately, this comes back to UK government support. If the UK government knows all those many years ago, as Neil said, had put in place some sort of fund, we wouldn't perhaps be having these discussions that we are now, because we'd be in a much better place. But we're not. So what needs to happen is they need to step up to the plate now. Better late than never in some regards, but they need to step up to the plate, invest in the city, the region, protect the now, and also build for the future.
Yeah, now obviously Peterhead isn't quite your turf,
No.
but as you say, that carbon capture and storage project was promised in 2014 and then was withdrawn not very long after the referendum vote. How big an impact did that have on Peterhead? I mean, what kind of response was there in the tune then, and how many jobs and whatnot do you think could have been generated by it?
You're stretching the depth of my knowledge here in terms of Peterhead. It's a wonderful place, but I don't spend too much time that far up the coast. But there was the key thing here is the fact that there was big promises made, and we're all used to the UK government making big promises about Scotland and the investment that they're going to make in Scotland, and the reality is that most of the time, certainly a lot of the time, they fail to deliver. Well, me and my colleagues who are down there at this moment in time aren't going to let them forget about the issues that are in play at this moment in time. And that's where we'll come back to this wider discussion about the oil and gas sector, carbon capture and storage, and just transition fund. We'll continue to fight the cause of Aberdeen, Peterhead, and the entire North East to make sure that there's that investment into the city and the wider region.
Yeah. Okay, and Neil, you spoke a wee bit about the kind of transfer of jobs and skills from the oil industry into renewables. How do you think that process can start to happen, and who should be involved in managing that transition, do you think?
I think there should be a manageable transition, as you say. I think it's been very difficult to do. I think it's something that the oil industry itself has been maybe dragging its heels on. But I think that where government can, and the UK government could have done it, but they've missed the boat in this, is to actually maybe give offsets and the discussions with oil industry to say, okay, how can we help to finance? How can we get this discussion? How can we get that transition for your workforce going? Of course, the Tory government have got a history in the past for the coal industry and the steel industry of putting an industry and just axing it right away, and without taking the considerations of people, the workforce and the communities in place, and that's what we don't want to see. It was also highlighted well in the film as well. But there is an aspect here that we really need to try and support these communities in this aspect. I think that discussion can still take place. I think that, as Stephen says, any transition between the workforce for oil and gas gas sector into renewables now. We need to have the discussion to try and help move that on forward. It's if it's remarkable, I think that when we're sitting here and we're talking about comparing ourselves to other places, and particularly that Norwegian oil fund. That Norwegian oil fund, as of yesterday, was sitting at £770 billion, and it's an astonishing amount of money that if we had it. And even though I know that it would be lovely to know that it was there, and if we had it in place from years ago, that could be doing benefit now. But hopefully, with the good work like Stephen and so on, trying to get something like that similar in place, and trying to fight for that corner for Scotland and for the North East, that can be done.
Yeah. And just one other thing I wanted to ask about there, and again, this might be beyond your technical expertise, but we talked on this show a few months ago about some new technology about producing hydrogen from oil wells. It was a Canadian research had been done where they'd been able to inject oxygen to crack the hydrocarbons, produce hydrogen, and keep the carbon dioxide, the remaining carbon dioxide, in the wells. Do you know if that's something that's being explored at all in the Northeast?
Actually, sorry,
Neil. Yeah, Neil.
Yeah, sorry that I've not got any knowledge of that being explored at the moment. It's a new technology on me, I must admit, that I've not heard of. But I would imagine that is very similar in the ways where, from my own background, it's been used in underbalance drilling, where you can maybe and overbalance as well, where you're maybe increasing the pressure within a well to try and extract any gas or oil to surface. This has been well used for many, many years in the oil and gas industry to extract the best out of a well. But if any of that technology, and it comes back to it again, it's the management of what the knowledge of the people within that industry itself can utilise towards looking at a new sector, a new industry, where you could potentially have a hydrogen production offshore. Or hydrogen production on existing platforms for the future. Because certainly it's going to be beneficial, not just to Scotland, but to worldwide. And if we've got the excellence, the people behind us that can actually get to speed on these kind of technologies and turn them into industry, that's going to be beneficial for us as a country and as for people in the long run.
Yeah, absolutely. We will drop you a wee note about that research because it sounds fascinating. It sounds very, very promising. If it's something we are able to take advantage of, I think it looks like a very promising promising kind of technology.
Can I comment on that? Is that okay?
As we look forward to Aberdeen without oil. Sorry, Stephen. Is this something? Before we move on, is that something you know anything about? Sorry,
I don't have any direct experience of it, but it's something that I'll certainly be looking into. I'm in obviously fairly regular contact with a number of the big oil companies, so I'll make sure and have those discussions. But in terms of hydrogen, more generally, it would be remiss of me not to do the wee hydrogen pitch for Aberdeen at this moment in time. Just a couple of 100 metres from my house is a hydrogen refueling station. Our city, of course, has hydrogen buses, hydrogen street sweepers. I'll get that out. Hydrogen waste vehicles, and I think it's certainly an area that we should be looking at in more detail. The opportunity to have hydrogen being created through entirely renewable sources as well is something that's incredibly important, and obviously the energy which is generated from that is fairly substantial, and the ability to have the likes of district heating networks and the like put in place on the back of a fully functioning hydrogen facility is something that we should be really excited about, because as I say, if you have that full renewable energy source going in order to allow the splitting to take place in the first place, then you can really achieve some fantastically good things. It's things that I've been talking to a lot of folk in the industry about, and I know that Aberdeen's a bit of a leader in that regard, and that's something that we should be proud of, and it's something that we should constantly talk up, and it goes back to having that level of expertise here that we should tap into as we move towards that renewable future that will come.
Aye. The last time I was in the city, I did notice those hydrogen buses. It is a really great step forward, I think. But as we look at the future of Aberdeen and the wider region without oil, one of the big ones, one of the big ideas that we've kind of started to talk about already is offshore wind. And I wondered, first of all, Stephen, if I could come to you, how big of an industry is that already for in the northeast?
It's obviously if you come to Aberdeen or Balmedy, just a little bit north, and take a little jaunt down to the beach, you'll see some beautiful wind turbines just off our coast. They're famous, of course, for the fact that the President of the United States is not a particularly big fan of them. But the reality is that Vattenfall development, which the council, I think, were involved in, Aberdeen City Council, to start off with, that development has been a bit of a game changer, and I think it's opened up a lot of eyes in the northeast as to what can be achieved. There's obviously the Kincardine wind farm, which is a little bit further down the coast, that you can almost see from the city on a good day. The floating wind turbines down there. Again, massive investment. The cable for that actually runs through not far from my house, not far from that hydrogen station I was referring to. So I think the level of investment that we've seen in offshore wind in the northeast has been incredibly good to see, particularly when it's on the doorstep of the oil and gas industry, because it shows what the future holds. And I think there's a realization, as I said earlier, that obviously we are going to get to the point where we don't have an economy locally that's built upon oil and gas. And when we get to that point, we need to have the likes of offshore wind as a mainstay, and hopefully branch out into a few of those other renewable projects where possible.
And what is the potential of that? I mean, are you hearing much about kind of further developments in that area?
Yeah, absolutely. If you talk to any of the energy companies in Aberdeen, there is a lot of focus on what they can do moving into the future. We all know about Scotland's capacity in terms of renewables, be that offshore wind, onshore wind, solar. It does exist in Scotland sometimes. Certainly in the last few days, it's been quite nice, and obviously wave turbines as well. In terms of our capacity, not just in terms of the UK, but in terms of the wider European continent as well, we have the opportunity to be a bit of a leader in this regard, and that's a really exciting thing, and that's an exciting message that we need to ensure that we continue to get across to the people of Scotland, that Scotland has that potential to be a global leader when it comes to renewable energy. You know, we're already doing fantastic things, and we can do even more with the full powers and direction of an independent Scottish Parliament.
Mm-hmm. And Neil, coming back to you again, you mentioned right at the beginning of the show some of the other industries that there are in Aberdeen. Obviously, agriculture is a big thing. Fishing is still a big thing in the region. What other industries are there in Aberdeen that you think are poised for growth going forwards into an oil-free future? I think we may have lost Neil for the moment. So, Stephen, would you like to answer that question instead?
Did you want to ask it again? Because I was expecting Neil to answer, so I wasn't listening.
Okay. I was going to say, what other industries are there in Aberdeen and the wider region just now that you think are other potential growth industries going forward?
Yeah, well, of course, the first one that comes to most Aberdonians' lips is food and drink. We've seen the global success of local businesses like Brewdog, and the way that they've managed to really create something which is incredibly positive. You've got the likes of Fear Spear. There's a number of phenomenal local food and drink outlets in Aberdeen who are exporting really, really good produce across not just Scotland, the UK, but across the globe. So food and drink's a hugely important thing. In terms of biomedical science, Aberdeen, again, through the wonderful campus that we have at Forester Hill, is doing some fantastic stuff. The James Hutton Institute, you can't discuss Aberdeen's economy without mentioning the James Hutton Institute and all the positive things that happen there in terms of research. So there's a lot of really positive things going on within the city and indeed the wider region, and we need to continue to talk these things up because they have a role to play, a really big role and positive role to play in Aberdeen's future. But going back to the starting issue in all of this conversation, they are a part of the jigsaw, but the biggest part of that jigsaw remains, of course, the oil and gas sector. So whilst we see continued investments through the city deal in the likes of the food and drink and the likes of the research that's getting undertaken in the city, the oil and gas industry is still the big thing that we have, and that's why we need to see continued investment from the UK government in the city and the region.
Sure. Now, I think we do now have Neil back, so I'll just recap the question for you, Neil. We were talking about, you were talking at the beginning of the show about some of the other industries that there are in the region. You talked about agriculture, fisheries, things like that. What other industries do you see as growth industries for the future of Aberdeen and the wider region?
I certainly think that the hospitality industry is certainly something that can be grown. I mean, we've got excellent food and drink within Aberdeenshire. It's quite unique to Scotland. We've got certainly tourism in some aspects of Aberdeenshire that can be grown and utilised even further, I think. But we've got people as our best commodity, and it's the people within those sectors. I think if we see in the future a potential for a place of learning for the hospitality industry to teach people, and particularly young people as well, into that sector, that's certainly something that can be done. I know there's a lot in Aberdeenshire, there's a lot of work done with One Aberdeen that can be done to try and promote the town itself. But there's also a few of our towns in Aberdeenshire that are bid towns, Inverurie being one of them. But there's also the groups and the places in our community that are coming away with new ideas and new thoughts and things that they would like to see within the community that also adds to that tapestry and that discussion that we might need in the future, for particularly for growing the hospitality within Aberdeenshire, and of course attracting more people to come to Aberdeen. There was the excellent new harbour that's getting built at Nig, that's going to hopefully welcome in visitors to the future, and hopefully that and expand that out into the Shire as well. So yes, there's certainly growth there.
Mm-hmm. Now we are just coming towards the end of the show, so to try and finish on a fairly positive note, Stephen, coming back to you first of all. The film talked a great deal about independence. It was, of course, made by the Aberdeen independence movement. And it highlighted that they felt that independence was the only way to secure a strong future for Aberdeen. How hopeful are you about the future of your city?
I'm incredibly hopeful about the future of the city, the region, and Scotland as a whole. I think we can do wonderful things if we have the full powers that we should have rest in Edinburgh. And I think the current oil and gas sector issues are a sure sign of the fact that the UK government doesn't work in Aberdeen's interest, it doesn't work in the region's interest, it doesn't work in Scotland's interest. It's primarily focused upon what's happening in and around London, and that's not good enough. And hopefully, as we move into better times, once we get through this really difficult phase through the coronavirus outbreak, once we get into better times, we can take a positive message to the people of Aberdeen and ensure that next time round the votes are resounding yes.
And Neil, similar kind of question to you. I mean, historically, the SNP was always quite strong in the northeast, but in the independence referendum, it was a pretty resounding no in Aberdeen and Aberdeenshire. Do you get the sense that has changed at all? I mean, we've seen obviously the polls starting to tilt more towards independence in the last year or two. Do you get the feeling that things are changing in your part of the world?
Yes, I do. We get a positive indication on the doors, and we're meeting people all the time who in 2014 voted no, but they've turned to us now and said if the referendum happened again, they would vote yes. I think that we have an obligation, though, to keep talking to people who voted no in 2014 and discuss them and say, well, how do you really think about how things are going? How do you feel about the downturn on the oil industry? How do you feel about COVID-19 and how it's been handled? How do you feel about the other issue that we talked about all of last year? It's been put back on the back burner, but we've still to discuss, and that's Brexit. So we've got a lot of things that we have to have open conversations with people who maybe didn't see or agree with Scottish independence, but to try and say, where do you feel about that now? How would you feel about it being different? And have that in an encouraging way to say that there's a positivity here for Scotland. There is a positivity that by discussing it and getting on with the fact of running our country ourselves, for ourselves, to make the very best for this generations and the younger generations to come, that we can really make a prosperous and better Scotland. And then potentially with that, we can show the rest of the UK how it can do better as well.
Mm-hmm. And Stephen, just finally, the same question to you really. Are you seeing a change in attitudes towards independence in the city?
Absolutely, and I think prior to everything that we've discussed tonight in relation to coronavirus and the oil and gas issues, Neil's touched upon it. Brexit, Aberdeen and the surrounding region is likely to be the hardest hit of any place in the entire UK as a result of Brexit. The people who live here want to remain part of the European Union. We see it as a good thing. We don't want to be dragged out against our will, and that's been a big game changer, because I think people have realised, certainly a lot of people who would otherwise have been minded to vote no, have realised that the best way to define their own future, to ensure that their voice is heard, is to have that voice heard in Edinburgh, to have an independent Scottish Parliament, because that is the way that you're going to ensure that Scotland remains within the European Union and all the benefits that come from that. So I think there has been a fairly significant change, certainly in the last 2 years, from all the door knocking that we've been doing. And I look forward to a time when we can get back out on those doors and make that positive case, listen to people, engage with them, and make that positive case about why Scotland should be independent and why their voice matters.
Well, that is just about all we've got time for. So I would like to, first of all, thank both of our guests coming in from the Northeast. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. And we'd like to thank you at home for joining us as well. This has been a different kind of show for Scotland at 7, but a kind of show that we hope we can do more of, where we can take a real deep dive into particular regions, particular topics, particular ideas, and get really into the meat of the issue. Oftentimes on the Monday to Thursday shows, we find we've only got a couple of minutes to talk about any given story, and it never feels like enough. So this has been a different kind of show, and I hope it's been one that's been welcome for you at home. If you would like to support Broadcasting Scotland, that would be very, very welcome. Every penny counts. It's not a cheap thing to do, making TV programmes. So if you are able to support us financially, then please do go to broadcastingscotland.scot/register. Sign up as a supporter there, and your £5 a month will make a huge difference to the quantity, the quality, and the type of programmes that we can produce for you. If you can't afford to do that, then please don't feel bad about it. We do understand that times are very tough for a lot of people, especially now. So if you can't afford it, don't worry. The shows will always be free to view online, and you're always very welcome to join us. But you can also still help us. You can follow us on our social media. You can follow us on Twitter at Broadcast Scot, and you can find us on Facebook as well. Just search Broadcasting Scotland. And if you do find us there, then you can share the programmes, share our tweets out, share our Facebook posts about the shows. Let people know why you're watching, what you're watching, why you think Broadcasting Scotland is important. That's the only marketing that we're able to do. We have not a penny to spend on advertising. So everything you can do to spread the word about Broadcasting Scotland, makes a huge difference. And also, of course, if you're interested in getting involved in producing television, there's always work to be done here, whether it's preparing scripts for shows, doing research, writing up the stories, making sure that there's no typos in the scripts, for example, so that I don't make daft mistakes. That's a very useful thing that you can do. But there's other jobs behind camera and in front of camera. If you're interested in getting involved, whether you have experience and want to put it to good use, or you want to get some experience to get involved in the industry, we're more than happy to have you. There's always stuff to be done. But that is all we've got time for. So once again, I'd like to thank Stephen Flynn MP and Councillor Neil Bailey. It's been a pleasure talking to both of you. All the very best for Aberdeen and the North East. And thank you again to you at home. We will be back on Sunday with the full Scottish as usual, and then we'll be back again on Monday with our regular Scotland at 7. But until then, have a great night. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Okay.